Hi, welcome to Slash It. My name is Jar, and in this video, we'll be discussing my top 10 horror movies of all time. Please remember, I have not seen every single horror movie, and that these are just my opinions. I would love to hear what your lists in the comments below. I would love to see how they match up to what I personally believe. It'd be kind of interesting to see exactly how they'll match up, so please do leave them in the comments below. That being said, let's jump into my top 10 horror movies of all time.
I only eat popcorn at the movies.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula.
So to top off the list at number 10, I have It, the movie, not the miniseries. This movie may be my favorite horror movie of all time, but I don't think that it is the best horror movie. There's a very distinct difference between best and favorite. If you somehow don't know what It is, I'll give you a brief overview, but I do not want to spoil too much. While this evil alien from space that takes the form of a clown comes every 27 years to eat people, the Losers, a gang of kind of misfit kids, fight against the clown who's named Pennywise, by the way. After Pennywise ate the sibling of one of the losers, the story is told in two movies, It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. Chapter 1 focuses on them as teenagers, fighting Pennywise. Chapter 2 focuses on them as adults who had to remember how they fought Pennywise the first time. The reason I like this so much is why it's so very terrifying at times. The second one is scarier than the first, personally. It also has some good chemistry between the characters and a great hidden meaning for things if you're paying any attention. I know this isn't rate the horror movie, but I would give this movie a solid 7 to 8 out of 10. I mean, this is probably the first horror movie I ever actually watched because it came out in 2017 and I just started getting into horror movies around that time. So this movie was PG-13 or maybe it was rated R. Not exactly sure, but PG-13 at least. So I got to see it in the theater, which was cool. It was the first horror movie I ever watched in the theater when it came out. So it holds a very deep place in my heart. Well, that brings us to number 9, Black Christmas. I know this movie is not the scariest, while it is so creepy at times. You have to give this movie props for it really being one of the first slasher movies ever made. I'm just going to give a brief, spoiler-free synopsis here. Basically, there are a frat group of college girls who are all living in the same frat house, like, frat girls do. And they get a creepy phone call. Yes, this is what popularized that trope of phone calls being creepy. And eventually, without spoiling too much here, the man kills the girls one by one, which is kind of where the final girl circuit and the slasher genre as a whole got its start. The reason I personally like this one is the fact that it's based on the one holiday of the year that is actually usually the happiest. The trope is that it's happier than all the other ones. Christmas, obviously. So it's interesting to me that a horror movie that is based around that time is such a cult classic for so many people. I hope that the one coming soon doesn't absolutely wreck the legacy. It's already out by this time that I recorded it. I haven't seen the newest Black Christmas, but it does not look like what it should be. I do think that there's a potential that it's more misleading us, and it's a completely different thing, but the reviews didn't look so good. So I don't know, eventually I'll watch it. They have remade this movie in 2006, but there is just so much messed up shit in that movie that I couldn't even really begin to describe, but there is this weird infatuation with eyeballs and like an incest plot that makes this movie like 1,000 times worse than the 1970s version. So yeah. Any of the Black Christmases, the original or otherwise, are definitely worth watching. But to skip talking about a hairy dude eating eyeballs for the next 20 minutes, I'm just going to move right on to the next spot. Well, you've made it to the point where you're too invested in a stranger's favorite movies to stop watching. So I hope you made a snack before clicking on the video. But that leads us on to our number 8 spot, Strangers Pray at Night. Did you like that transition? Strangers, I'm a stranger to you. Strangers Pray at Night. Okay, never mind. This movie, while it is pretty basic to a certain degree, it is also a certain almost perfection of this type of masked killer. The kind of movie that Michael Myers or Jason is kind of a part of. There's this first one of these. You could put the first one here in the spot, honestly, if you chose to. I chose the second one because, in my opinion, it's slightly better. Just the tone and the atmosphere of this movie makes it better, at least from my perspective. It definitely is the prime example for the unknown creepy killer that only do it for fun subgenre of horror. They just randomly pick a house, and like the ending of the first one, skip forward 30 seconds if you don't really want the spoiled, but they say at the very end of the movie, because you were home. And that sentence by itself, with very little context throughout the rest of the movie, is 100% enough to send shivers down literally anyone's spines whenever you think you were experienced in the horror genre or not. Personally, I like the movie because they don't have any over-the-top or too mysterious personality. Like, this movie portrays them with a personality, but yet they also have a hidden layer of ambiguity that you don't really know how to handle unless you've seen the film before. So you're kind of left in this weird state as the viewer, trying to process exactly what is going on in the movie, while you're also trying to figure out exactly what makes you so creeped out by these people alone, besides the fact that they're trying to break into a house and kill people, obviously. I think this movie is definitely a must-see if you are a big modern horror film buff, especially if you're trying to figure out what you do and do not like. I don't have a smart-ass transition for this one, so cut me a little slack. I'm hoping the last two transitions will get through this lack of transition. But here at our number 7 spot, It Chapter 2. Yes, specifically Chapter 2. It is at our number 10 spot. But honestly, It Chapter 2 very well may be my favorite sequel in the horror genre. Now this may seem like a very big overstep, but personally, I think it felt really grounded in the first essence of the first movie, but more adultish. Speaking of adults, the casting for the adults in this film were absolutely knocked out of the park. I cannot tell you a single casting that I thought was not perfected in this movie, especially with Eddie and Richie. If you put a picture of them side to side without knowing that they weren't, I would definitely think that they were pictures of the same person. But let's talk about the plot a little bit. At this point, I'm sorry, but you should know just how deep I go into spoilers. You may not want to watch anymore. But it starts 27 years after the death of Pennywise. The losers are now all grown up with their different careers and jobs. Everyone but Stanley comes back to Derry. If you've read the book, you'll know why. But anyways, after they come back to Derry, they have to face their fears as adults and kill Pennywise. They do some things, and they finally get to Pennywise, but he is in his actual form. Yes, he's an alien thing, not a demon clown. And Pennywise turns into a spider and kills Eddie. The rest of the losers kill Pennywise and they live out the rest of their lives. There is this subplot, you can pick up on it if you were paying attention, but this part is not in the book. But Richie was actually in love with Eddie, which we see after his death when he goes back to the bridge he wrote their initials into when they were younger, and it's surrounded by a heart. I honestly kind of love this edition because it adds a certain layer to their relationship that otherwise would not have been there. It also makes you rewatch the first chapter in a completely different light after you know that hidden fact about Richie. Also creepy because during the entire movie, Pennywise is saying that he knows Richie's dirty little secret, which is obviously him being bisexual or gay or whatever it is. Well, we've made it to the devil's number. My number 6 spot will have to go to the original Friday the 13th. This is probably the most controversial pick on this list. Or maybe not. I'm not too sure. While I enjoyed Friday the 13th, I really do not think that the original really had any certain charm or thing that made it special. While I'm definitely glad it did get the sequels it did, Jason Voorhees is a top 3 horror villain, I don't think it deserves them if I have to be 100% honest. This is the main reason why I put this movie at this spot. I don't think it's a terrible movie by any means, especially if you look at it from the perspective of when it was made, but I don't think it's really stood the test of time compared to some other films on this list, especially the more classic ones that are closer to the number 1 spot. Just so I don't get absolutely destroyed in the comments, I don't think that Friday the 13th is a bad movie in almost any way, but I don't think, and I'm quite surprised, it was such a huge hit, and that it ended up getting 11 sequels. We made it here, thank you for watching. Here's the number 5 spot, Jaws. I bet you weren't expecting this to be here, but it is. Jaws is probably one of the best horror movies ever made that focuses around animals and probably of all time. I can't really think of any of them that follow in animals being the main villain. This is the best thing about this movie in my opinion. If you don't know, Jaws follows a shark who is out to kill people and he stalks Amity Island and kills the people who are swimming there. It's a beach town, so there are many people swimming during the summer when this movie is set, but you rarely actually see the shark other than a couple times at the climax of the horror. The biggest time you actually see Jaws is at the end of the film. I'm not going to spoil if you've never seen it, but it's a pretty good ending. Basically, the horror is left to us as the viewer to decide what is the scariest thing that could be under the water. What kind of face does a killer shark have? What would be the worst and what would be most scary to us? In my opinion, that is why this is one of the best horror movies, because it leaves it up for the viewer to imagine what is scariest to them. I also have a connection to this movie because it was the first horror movie I ever watched. I was about 8 or 9 and I watched this movie and I have a fear of dark water because of never knowing if a giant 9-foot shark is going to be chilling in the water ready to eat 9-year-old me. So maybe take this opinion with a grain of salt. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but I definitely check this out if you've never seen this movie before. It is definitely worth it. Okay, we are making it to the tough spots here. This one took a lot of consideration. I'm going to put Friday the 13th Part 3 here. I know this probably seems like a really weird place considering how I somewhat shit on the original Friday the 13th, but when I really think about it, I don't think Friday the 13th really starts until after Jason gets his hockey mask, because before that, it feels like a shell of itself. I think the reason it succeeded is because the reason that the hockey mask was the final mask that they decided to stick with to cover Jason. If they've never found the hockey mask to use, I don't think it would ever become the franchise that it is. If you don't know, obviously Friday the 13th Part 3 is the movie where Jason Voorhees gets his infamous hockey mask that has since become a staple of this entire franchise. Honestly, okay, here we are going to do a test. I want you to close your eyes. No, I'm not kidding, close them. Okay, I'll wait till you close them. Mark, your mama plays Fortnite, now close your fucking eyes. Thank you. Okay, now when I see the title of this franchise, I want you to know what the first thing that comes to your mind is. Friday the 13th. Now, there are a couple of things that could have come up, whether it be your favorite kill from the series or just an iconic shot. But when you give it a second thought, I bet that the hockey mask is close to the first or second thing that pops up. Or put it this way, if you were trying to describe the movie because you didn't know the name of it, you wouldn't say the one with the dude who kills people with a sack over his head, you'd say the one with the hockey mask killer and everyone would know exactly what you're saying. I personally think this is one of the best Friday the 13th sequels. While you may not think of this movie as being very important to getting the Friday the 13th series as popular as it is now, I'd advise you to give it a rewatch and see if you see what I'm seeing in this film. This is where the cooking gets spicy. We are getting down to my top 3 horror movies of all time. So to deny the angry comments no further, here is my number 3 spot. Saw. Yep, that is the choice. Don't yell at me. If you've seen this movie before, you'll know the basic premise, but I'm going to tell the people that have never seen this movie before. If you don't already know, the entire plotline to this movie already, I'm about to explain it. Basically, an old man trapped 2 people in a room chained to some rusty pipes, and I'm trying to be as little descriptive as possible, but basically, the entire movie spans in this one bathroom. You get flashbacks and other things, and other people, and other visions of their families and shit. And you get flashbacks and connections to start to unravel the creator's reasonings for putting the people in this room, and why it makes sense for them to be there and how they got there, and how what happens at the end happens. I don't really want to spoil it because it is a good movie, but trust me when I say, if you don't already know anything about this movie, you will have an absolute fucking blast watching this movie. The number 2 spot has to go to the toughest choice, but I definitely have to put this movie in this spot. This spot goes to the original 1978 Halloween. It probably makes sense, and you'll see why I love this movie so much in my videos as time progresses, but this movie, in my opinion, sparked the obvious horror boom that would encapsulate the 1980s. This leads into why I think Halloween deserves this spot. In my opinion, Halloween is pretty much one of the most perfect horror movies, only matched by my number 1 spot. Michael Myers is the perfect villain with the perfect mixture of backstory and ambiguity that leaves his character understood enough to not seem unrealistic, but also mysterious enough to be scary from the unknown parts of Michael. Not just the main villain is perfect, the setting, and even just the neighborhood, and the fact that Laurie Strode is a babysitter makes this movie not only interesting, but also relatable and something that could happen to anyone no matter where you are in the world, which increases the ability for this movie to become more popular among people no matter where in the world they are. If you have not seen Halloween, I do not want to spoil too much. There's not a lot to spoil if I'm honest with you, but still, I don't want to say too much. But the iconic parts of this movie are things you've definitely seen before. Number 1, this is probably not a surprise, but my favorite and my number 1 spot is The Shining. This is probably so freaking obvious, but the way Stanley Kubrick writes and directs the tension of this movie is something that I've only seen anything remotely close to once before in my entire life, and that is John Carpenter's The Thing. There are a couple of reasons why I did not include The Thing on this list, but that's a video for a different time. There are so many things done in this movie to make the suspense and lack of ton of jump scares completely worthwhile. If you don't know the plot, I'm going to try to keep it somewhat ambiguous because I don't want to ruin too much. But basically, a man and his family go up to a winter lodge because the man is the winter caretaker. He slowly goes insane and starts doing and seeing insane things, and that's as much as I want to say about this movie. If you've never seen it, I'd advise going into it as blind as possible. This wraps up my top 10 horror movies of all time, and the first ever video on this channel. I hope you all enjoyed it and will stick around. Go follow my Twitter account @slashithhorror and my personal account for other things @JarJarYT. That's all for this video. Make sure to treat every day like it's Halloween.